old world skills are not going to get us new world desires, like we're inheriting our parents' patterns, no fault of theirs, but we're like inheriting them because they inherited them from their grandparents, and our great grandparents were on the Oregon Trail, some of them, or in wars or in whatever. They're not thinking about like, I really need to handle my defensiveness when I come home.
Exactly. Yeah.
I find and I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I find the social media environment, or just the psychology environment, to really demonize or not give compassion to the person who tends to pull away, but gives a lot of space and solutions for the people who chase, right? Like the people who chase, or who might identify as anxiously attached, are like, I'm just trying to love you. And like, I show up and I show up and I show up and I listen to books and podcasts and I do all the things. And here you are watching football, or, not listening to the podcast I asked you to listen to, but not actually asking the questions that you invited. Like maybe they're pulling away because they don't feel safe to be themselves. Or I'm curious your thoughts on maybe why we do that with empaths and anxious people.
I have a lot of thoughts on it. And as a sort of recovered anxious attachment person, and I did a whole workshop on this, and I really, really like helping people who are anxiously attached to get to take more ownership of that and change some of their behavior. Anxiety, I think it's that anxiety. First of all, anyone who identifies as being avoidant, they have a tremendous amount of anxiety too. It's just manifesting differently physiologically. They're going more into a shutdown, the other person is not. But I think that just the word anxious inspires so much sympathy from people, because we all know what it's like to feel anxious, and it feels absolutely awful. And I think that we all know what it feels like to be rejected and to feel abandoned. I think these are things, this is part of the human condition. And I think that it's more obvious on the outside that the person who's anxiously attached is feeling all this rejection and all this abandonment and all this anxiety. And so we tend to, we get that. We understand that there isn't a person who does not know on this planet, I don't think, after a certain age, who doesn't know the feeling of being rejected. So that's what I think. And also, oftentimes when we think of someone with an avoidant attachment style, we associate the silent treatment with that, stonewalling. And these are things that are very much on the forefront of everyone's brain as being highly dysfunctional and borderline, if not completely emotionally abusive.
Right.
That's why. Though I have worked with people with what others would refer to as anxious attachment that's very severe. And the things that they have done has been on the same spectrum of emotional abuse, not allowing someone to leave the room, literally with their bodies blocking the door, screaming at the quote unquote avoidant, profanity. I mean, I've known people to be in such wildly dysfunctional, toxic situations. And I think what's so important for people to understand is that if you are in a situation like that, you are part of a dynamic, and you have to be able to see your role in all of it. Now, that I'm not saying that this is the case, someone's beating you or something really extreme like that. But I am talking about the wild anxiety of someone being with someone who's stonewalling. There's, again, when I dig, there's always more to the story. And the anxiously attached person will do things that they later say, my God, that was not cool of me. That was not right. So anyway, to answer your question is, I think people associate the avoidance with the withholding. There's something so wrong with withholding love, and withholding attention. It's so obvious that is just wrong. But usually what happens in, like we said earlier, in these dynamics is that the anxiously attached will then punish and do their own form of withholding love.
Right.
It's complicated.
It
It's
is, isn't it?
really not black or white. So I think that that's why why there's more sympathy for the person who's just like, give me love, and then the avoidant who's just like, I'm just going to withhold it. When people frame it like that, there is sort of a clear victim and a clear villain, but it's very rarely the truth of the matter.
Yeah, I totally agree. At least there needs to be some compassion and space for why someone's response to overwhelm is withdrawal or shutting down, or why is the energetic of the person seeking the conversation, perhaps it triggers the other person's nervous system and they're like, I got to get away. It's, a template of disorganization and chaos that, because I think we consider a lot abandonment wounds or rejection wounds, quote unquote, but we don't actually really think a lot about enmeshment wounds or being smothered or helicopter
Yes,
parenting. I've had a conversation about parenting recently, and I got a lot of messages being like, no matter what you do as a parent, you can't. And we don't often consider that even being controlling and overwhelming as a parent wounds a child where they don't have space. And so they can become avoidant, or having to take care of a parent's needs, or an angry or a narcissistic parent, right? Like, we're pivoting around their needs. And so we think someone else's needs comes with the loss of ourselves. So we're like, no, preserve self. You're too much, in which we, of course, hear that a lot.
exactly. So it's complicated. I do think that who a person chooses to be in a relationship matters. We're always going to face our trauma inside of her, even if we're with the right person. We're always going to be up against fear, our impulse to close our hearts and shut down the moment that we're afraid, as opposed to being vulnerable. But, there's some people who are just better matched for you, for one, than others. That's why I always say, like, if you're dating someone, it's within the first month, 2 months, like really early, like that's the time to be really assertive and ask for your needs to be met. Because if your basic needs can't be met in month one, it's so tragic to me. And I see more women doing this, but men do this too, by the way, of just being like, well, I'm going to overlook that, or I'm going to try to earn their love. And it just becomes a mess so quickly. Who you choose matters. That the first few months of a relationship really matters. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
learn a lot. You
Mm-hmm.
learn a lot. If you're noticing that someone is just shutting down over like the littlest things, like you can really say, like, this isn't I'm not being controlling. They're just like, I asked for a need to be met, and all of a sudden I don't hear from them for a couple of days. Yeah, that is a nightmare. Run far away from that. Who needs that?
You're right.
Who needs that? But if you're just going to stay and try to earn their love, well, then guess what? You are part of the problem. You're part of the dynamic. You've got to work on you.